This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome into episode number 119 here in the Huskies Warming House podcast. Moving into the second week of July here on the show, Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon, who looks like he's about to mug somebody in an alley, but sun's out, guns out, I suppose, if that's the case here. But it's starting to warm up around here, don't you? In the hockey world too, nonetheless, Nick. But yeah. About that, we have a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah, and a lot of interesting tidbits, both Minnesota Wild and otherwise. The title of this episode is When It Rains, It Pours, and it's not often that I actually have the title of the show selected before the show has been written or recorded, but pretty obvious for this week. A lot of stuff going on, a lot of extensions, a lot of signings going on. We'll talk about that in the early portions of the show. A trade and draft frenzy, a lot of things going on already, a lot of movement in the National Hockey League, as well as one of the more intriguing drafts that we've had since the salary cap era began. Moving on to some other things too, Russian scares, a lot of interesting things coming over on the other side of the world. And then our extra ice session, we're going to talk about some angry goaltenders and a little bit about how the Minnesota Wild actually did during draft day. You won't want to miss it all. And we start, as always, with Center Ice View News and Notes in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
News and Notes, Noah, and it's been 10 days since we last recorded, and as you mentioned, a lot of stuff has happened. As we previewed, lots of signings and extensions. Again, free agency opens up this upcoming Wednesday, so a lot of big names are out there, including unrestricted and restricted free agents. So let's talk about some of the big ones. We're first starting behind the bench. Jim Montgomery, officially named head coach of the Boston Bruins, 29th head coach in team history. And then in subsequent news, sticking with Boston, how about this? Jake DeBrusk, who has essentially requested a trade last year, has rescinded his trade request from the team after the news of Montgomery's hire. Now, don't know if these are related per se, but he did sign a 2-year, $4 million deal this offseason to stay in a Boston sweater. So a couple of things heading in the right direction up there in the northeast part of the U.S. Let's head towards the America's wasteland. I'm not talking about North Dakota. I'm talking about Winnipeg. After essentially sort of missing out on what they thought was going to be hiring a Barry Trotz, able to grab their new coach. And this one, I think, surprised me a little bit, Noah. Rick Bowness. A 2-year, $2.5 million deal, and a club option for a 3rd year. This is surprising to me. A quick couple of tidbits, right? For Winnipeg, 8th coach in franchise history. For Bonus, began his coaching career with the original Winnipeg Jets, now the Arizona Coyotes, or the Houston Aeros, whichever you want to go with, back in 1988. Also ended his NHL playing career in 1982 with, what do you think, the Winnipeg Jets. So there's some ties there, but kind of shocking a bit, Noah, that not necessarily of Rick Bowness, but the fact that they got to that point, because you got to remember too, the entire coaching staff of Dallas resigned. There were a lot of questions surrounding the Dallas organization, and more importantly for Rick Bowness, was he ready to retire him? Well, with this news, he's still coaching.
Yeah, we'll talk about this a little bit later with Vancouver coming up here, but it's kind of weird too. The former Minnesota North Stars, now the Dallas Stars, and the current Minnesota Wild squad, a lot of ties between those two teams splayed out around the National Hockey League in the last decade or so, just with all the hirings and firings and resignings and whatever. And also interesting that both of our new coaching hires were the last two coaches of the Dallas Stars, right? And Jim Montgomery and then Rick Bowness. So it's been an interesting time in the coaching world. I think obviously losing out to Barry Trotz has a big implication on this, obviously, but you wonder if Rick Bowness was a guy that was high up on the radar behind Barry Trotz, or you wonder if maybe there was like a second circling back, if you will, or a second interview process that maybe kind of reshuffled the deck, so to speak. A lot of moving parts that I don't know that we'll particularly have the answer to. But the Jets finishing 6th last year in the Central Division would like a lot better finish coming up next season.
Agreed. And you kind of wonder too, you wonder if this was more a Rick decision and whether there was an offer before that, right? Even with Barry Trotz, and whether Rick maybe needed some time to decompress from the situation after he resigned from Dallas. And then, like you mentioned, we probably won't ever know the true answers to the situation, but congratulations to both the Jets and to Rick Bowness, who are going to be with each other now for the next 2, if not 3 years. Speaking of relationships that are doomed tragedies, my goodness, San Jose. Now, you talk about coaching firings and you talk about timing, right? Minnesota Wild fans would know timing can be kind of weird. And when I say weird, how about the Paul Fenton firing just a couple of years ago back in 2019? In fact, I was there in early August when that firing was announced in St. Paul, and talking to the Wild Craig Leopold. Again, kind of shocking the timing, right? Well, San Jose Sharks, not to be out sharked, apparently, they fired head coach Bob Boughner after a 67, 85, and 23 record in 175 games. That's a .380 winning percentage. Not great.
Yeah.
Never made the playoffs. Again, the Sharks have been really reeling since they made pushes up until the Stanley Cup final in 2017. Really have not been the same team since. They've lost a lot of their key players. They haven't really held on to a lot of their young talent. They also gave up a lot of futures for those deep playoff runs back in the early and mid 2000s, 2010s, I should say. So this is where, every good deed doesn't go unpunished, right? To pick up on things, and maybe I should do this, Noah. Before we get to this, I did watch the interview with interim GM Joe Will. He was the assistant GM with the San Jose Sharks, acting to try to get to our next piece of news, the new GM hired. They were asked about the timing of this, and it does seem to paint the picture that with the GM hiring process, they were getting a lot of feedback as to where this organization was and where they thought they needed to move in a different direction. So I'm not sure if that's an indictment on Bob Boughner and the coaching staff, an indictment on the San Jose Sharks organization as a whole, but very surprising to make this move now, where San Jose, not to say that, there's other coaches that are out there that haven't had an NHL job before, but you do wonder the timing, right? So I think we'll touch on this in a second. But in doing so, they did hire GM Doug Wilson's replacement. Again, he was resigning mostly due to medical issues. Mike Greer, a former Stark himself, spent 3 years with the club on the ice as part of his 14-year NHL career. First Black GM in NHL history. This is a big deal. And it sounds like the Greer family, brother is a GM in Florida. His dad was a general manager too, so there's some family ties here and success, and they need it. The San Jose Sharks is in a pretty tough situation moving forward. Now, before taking this GM job, he's not fresh, off retirement. He's worked for Chicago, New Jersey, and the Rangers as in front office position. So he's got some experience. He's had some polishing of the craft per se. But Noah, your thoughts on the timing of the coach's fire, and maybe some comments also on Mike Greer being the first Black coach in NHL history.
Yeah, it's an interesting timing bit, obviously, because we kind of went through the flurry of coaching hires and the best available, so to speak. But like you talked about, I mean, Doug Wilson stepping down, hasn't been recent, but it also hasn't been that far removed from us first hearing about it too. So you wonder if that process was just kind of taking its time. And like you said, as that feedback kind of indicated, maybe a change was in the wind. When you have a .380 winning percentage, and some of that comes down to just the core that you're given, and the San Jose Sharks inherently are a very flawed hockey team right now. Like you said, ever since the 2016 Stanley Cup final where they lost in Game 6 to Pittsburgh on home ice in that final. So, it's interesting to me that, you would do it right essentially as draft day and draft weekend is winding up and winding down, so to speak. But, it's better late than never. I mean, to be honest, we're still at the, barely into the second week of July. And this is plenty of time for them to find a replacement for a new head coach. And sometimes, as odd as it is to know that usually the teams that have to fill their coaching hires first sometimes get the big fish in the market, sometimes being the last dog at the bowl can reap some unforeseen rewards sometimes, where you get to pick up somebody that maybe is a reclamation project, so to speak, or someone who maybe is a candidate out of left field that suddenly becomes a very perfect fit for this squad. So a lot of things going on San Jose, some positive, some negative, but it's been a whirlwind week down in Southern California.
Very wild. And speaking of, when it rains, it pours, right? You talk about news for San Jose. This one, definitely not of the best type. The death of former player and scout Brian Marchment, only at age 53. He was attending the Nhl Draft in Montreal. Obviously don't know exactly what happened. 17-year NHL veteran from 1989 to 2006. 9 teams that he played with, again, including San Jose. A very close friend of newly hired GM Mike Greer. Unexpected, and again, still don't know any cause of death at this moment. So we do wish the family, the friends, and anybody that Brian Marchment touched all the thoughts here from the Huskies Warmers podcast. A tough situation for sure.
Yeah, definitely a difficult situation, especially, when things are unexpected like that. Obviously, going to the NHL draft, as exciting as it is for young players, it's exciting for scouts to put, their year's work on the line, so to speak, and be able to kind of influence those sort of things. And you wonder if San Jose's picks obviously were influenced by that too in this year's upcoming draft. But a very difficult day for hockey when anyone passes away, but especially at that age, and someone who is well loved within the organization. It's always a difficult time. So the San Jose Sharks, both personally and professionally, have a lot of things to kind of consider, things to kind of sit back and reflect on, and then kind of being able to pick up the pieces and kind of turn over a new leaf for this squad. So you do wish the family the best, and you also wish the organization the best, both on and off the ice, because there's a lot of moving parts for them right now.
Yes, there is. Speaking of moving parts, some parts moving from one team to another. Vancouver adding Mike Yeo, yes, as an assistant coach to Bruce Boudreau with the NHL club. Again, I've said it before. Mike Yeo, he keeps getting jobs because he knows hockey.
Yeah.
Now, whether he can communicate that or whether he can build a rapport with his players, again, is well documented. That seems to be the problem. But he keeps getting looks, and so there you go. Former Chicago head coach Jeremy Colleton, now named the head coach of the Abbotsford in the AHL. So that will be him getting actually pretty high rung after a pretty tough time in Chicago. Again, I'm not sure Jeremy Colleton was also given the best card to deal with, as well as Chicago is in this certainly full rebuild mode. We're definitely going to talk about that later in the show. And the Canucks, how about this? Also made waves this past week. This is kind of a fun topic. Drafting defenseman Elias Patterson, yes, same as their number 1 center, with the 80th overall pick. 2 have never met. And I think another fun nugget was, I think there was probably a little bit of a preparation for this, but they asked Elias Pettersson, the current Elias Pettersson of Vancouver's roster, who his favorite player was, and he said Elias Pettersson, so that was kind of fun. Moving on forward here, Toronto promoting Hall of Fame inductee Haley Wickenheiser and 2 others to assistant GM positions within the organization, and also adding a new goaltending coach. So Toronto making some executive moves as well. So this is the time where these things happened, and some exciting times around the league.
Yeah, so that will do it for the executive news. Over to player signings and extensions, a lot of them, obviously, as we move into the heart of summer. As far as the Minnesota Wild are concerned, we're going to talk about the Wild's moves, kind of in the similar vein. Later in the show. So we'll touch on them at the tail end of the main portion of the show and moving into the extra ice session. Other teams around the National Hockey League. Let's start with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Step one is done. It's a big step, but also a baby step at the same time. Don't really know how that works. It's a diagonal step. Can we call it that? 35-year-old Chris Letang was given a 6. Yes, you heard that right.
The hell?
6-year contract with a $6.1 million average annual value. He'll be 41 by the end of this deal. Now, he did have a career high 68 points last season, which for some reason seems odd. Like, I feel like you would think at some point he had a season that was better than 68 points. In fact, Ryan Suter, I believe, had a season in which he tallied more points than 68. So, like, that's kind of wild. Seventh in Norris Trophy voting this season. The team did also re-sign netminder Casey DeSmith to a 2-year, $3.6 million deal. So what does this mean for the Pens here, Nick? $15.3 million in projected cap space. Evgeny Malkin is the big one in the UFA category. Rickard Rakell is also a UFA, and Kasperi Kapanen and Denton Heinen are both RFAs. So what's going on with Malkin? Well, he's been in the news recently as well. Apparently, the original offer was 2 years at $6 million average annual value. That has now been up to 3 years at that same value. Evgeny Malkin is not particularly enamored with the term. Apparently, the price point is all right. It's the term that's becoming a problem here. And apparently, a bunch of teammates had texted Malkin and said, okay, all these guys are getting signed. When's your deal? Kind of excited and, hopefully getting him back to the team. And he texted his teammates and said, they think I'm not good anymore. And negotiations, have stalled after that offer. And even Sidney Crosby visited Malkin at his home in South Florida, not to persuade him to sign a deal, but kind of just to give him comfort because apparently he's a little on edge here. So a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. And Malkin's biggest issue was that Mario Lemieux kind of gave him this offer and said, we're going to take care of you, even when he had that major knee construction and injury back in 2020 and moving into 2021. The same knee he re-aggravated about a decade prior. He did still put up 20 points in his return back in the final third or fourth of the season on a leg that wasn't so great and really is kind of rehabbing and recharging for the season. Unfortunately, it was his contract year. I don't know which is more challenging. Will Chris Letang somehow be the ageless wonder and live out the life of this contract? Or is Evgeny Malkin a little bit too broken and maybe should he take this deal, or does he have a case? He's still a good hockey player, but his injury point, I think, is really scaring the Pens off.
Well, and the thing about Chris Letang's contract, it's very front loaded too, right? So in terms of salary, so in other words, kind of the team and Chris Letang get the best of both worlds a little bit, because then that deal becomes tradable essentially after year 3 in terms of eating salary and also cap hit. So Vegas and Tampa will be trading for that contract, no question. But again, this is a difficult decision, right? And we've talked about this before on the show of whether Malkin's injury is going to hamper his value, and it definitely is. And at the end of it, it's surprising because if you think about it, in the NFL, you can restructure contracts at essentially whenever, right? Whereas an NHL contract, when it's signed, it's a fully guaranteed contract, right? Yeah. So the thing that's, I think, scaring the Penguins a bit is no different than you have a Chris Letang, who he's a 35-year-old on a 6-year deal. Whoa, you have Malkin that is made of broken glass right now.
Yeah, and pushing 36. Yeah,
and pushing 36. So, so is this upper management, trying to keep, the same boys in the clubhouse there for another run at the Cup? Again, they've been ousted the last 4 or 5 years in a row in the first round. Yeah. So Penguins fans and the team also understand that they're approaching a transition. We haven't even talked about Sidney Crosby yet, right?
Yeah.
So
who's 34? And I got to be honest, if I'm Evgeny Malkin, and I get it, you want your money, I understand, and the extra year obviously means a lot. But $18 million guaranteed. And I know they don't get all of that money, but $6 million average annual value up until you're roughly 39 years old. And then, maybe you're at $1 million a year after that, depending on where you're at. I think that's more than fair for a guy who's earned his keep and has had a heck of a career, and I'm not saying Malkin should take it. I understand players have rights and they want to make their money because they retire earlier than most when it comes to their careers. But I don't think that it's the Penguins don't want him. It's that the Pens have to think about the future. And unfortunately, with this aging core, Evgeny Malkin is not the center core piece anymore. And I think the offer is fair value for a guy who has given his all in a Pen sweater and does. I think it's a very respectful offer for him. So I hope to see him back in a Penguin sweater, and I hope it all works out. So, somebody who I think got very fair market value, and this is a very good signing for the Nashville Predators here, re-upping superstar Philip Forsberg, 8 years, $8.5 million per season. If he lives out the life of the contract, he will play a total of 18 years with the Predators. He's already played 10 so far. 27 years old, 42 goals, 42 assists, 84 points in 69 games this season. He was one shy of tying the team leading goals, and he had 9 fewer games than the guy who did it in Matt Duchene. So the Washington Capitals infamously drafted him 11th overall in 2012 before trading him for Martin Erat and Michael Latta in April of 2013.
I cannot wait to see the Steve Dangle trade tree in about 10 years with this.
Yeah, seriously.
You talk about some of the worst trade values in history. In fact, one of those happened just a few days ago. We'll talk about that too. But my goodness, Washington, what in the heck were you doing?
And it's funny because I was reading through the comments, after this was posted for the deal, and there's so many people in the comments who were like, this is a terrible deal. Why would they give him all this money? The guy had 84 points in 69 games. Wake the F up.
You don't get a 42 goal scorer proven in the NHL off of the shelf very often.
Yeah, and he's
organization.
He's an undersized guy, so to speak, and he's a superstar in the National Hockey League. On a team that is very middling. Great signing for the Predators and excited for them long term. Los Angeles, every Minnesota Wild fan's favorite right now. Adrian Kempe. 4-year extension, $5.5 million annually, 54 points
contract,
and 78 games played for him. He's 25 years old, so good for him getting some money here. Brock Besser, the Minnesota native, admittedly had a difficult season off the ice, a pretty good second half, actually, though, after Bruce Boudreau came into the helm there. A 3-year extension worth just under $20 million total, which includes a 10-team no-trade list in 2024-25. 46 points in 71 games, so what was considered a slightly down year for him was still somewhat productive on a Vancouver team that was, again, very middling as well, too. So 25 years of age and pretty good pickup for him. But yeah, a lot of the off-ice things with the passing of his dad and things like that, it's been a difficult road for him. So you kind of wish him the best moving forward. Turns out, Nick, the Tampa Bay Lightning, they really like Nick Paul, apparently.
Yeah, they do. I thought he was actually really good for him, too.
Yeah, 7-year extension worth $3 million per season. Wow, okay, fourth line money getting paid. You love to see it. Sure. If he continues to play the way that he is, that's a steal for the Bolts, I think. Adam Boqvist in Columbus, 3-year deal, $2.6 million per year. Colorado bringing back 35-year-old Andrew Cogliano for just a single season. Etu Luostarinen, Florida, 2-year extension. That is such a difficult name. And Ottawa planning to waive and buy out 26-year-old Colin White. This is an interesting one here. 3 seasons remaining, $4.75 million per year. Never really panned out as the guy that they expected when they drafted him 21st overall in 2015.
Correct.
Had 28 points in 69 games played over the past 2 seasons and has had some health issues. But why did they buy him out at this point? He's still an RFA. So the Sens only pay a third of his contract in the buyout, saving over $3 million per season for the next 3 years. So we talk about savvy moves. The Sens just pulled one here, except for the fact that they barely get over the cap floor every year. So, I mean,
correct. But, and I think if I can make one correction here, no, I think it's not the RFA status. I think it's because he's not 26. or not 27, or I think it's more age related at this time when he signed his
Yeah,
deal.
it's age related, but like he's also an RFA status on top of that. Yeah. So
right.
because for example, I'm trying to remember what it is. Maybe there's still an RFA at 26. I thought there was something in there where it's like you can become a UFA if you play X number of years in the league, like if you come in at 18. But
games played. Yeah. And it depends on so many different things. It's not easy to follow, we'll put it that way.
But a nice little move for a guy that unfortunately has not been productive. I think he's a guy that maybe might still find a home, maybe like Arizona, maybe a guy that maybe some team just kind of takes a chance on as a fourth line guy and see if he can maybe kind of rekindle a career.
And he would be a low risk for the team in terms of his contract. He's had some injury issues, which hasn't helped for Colin White. And I think, especially with a lot of teams against the cap, he actually might be more sought after than maybe we realize, just because he might be just a financially good option for a lot of teams.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of like a couple of years ago from Minnesota, maybe like an Eric Fair kind of guy.
Yeah.
Maybe just fits in well in that bottom six and can kind of just be a utility player that maybe adds some value. Maybe Alex Galchenyuk is another comparable, although I think Galchenyuk maybe had a little bit more pure skill than Colin White does, but we'll have to see moving forward. Second to last topic here, a guy who had plenty of skill in his career. Let's just put it that way. Retirement news. This one kind of surprised me a tad, to be honest with you. Edmonton's Duncan Keith called it a career. 17 seasons, 737 points in just over 1,400 NHL games. 38 years of age. I thought maybe he'd have a year or two left in him. 3 Stanley Cups, 2 Olympic gold medals, 2 Norris trophies, and a Conn Smythe Award to go on top of that cherry flavored cake, whatever you want to call it. Future Hall of Famer, 1 year left on his contract. So Edmonton actually saves $5.5 million this season. Chicago, they owe that amount in cap recapture this year and $1.9 million the next, but they do have ample cap space, so it shouldn't really bother them. But Duncan Keith, slightly polarizing at times, not the most fluid of skater, but made a heck of a career out of it.
He was a battler. I think that was the big thing, and that also partly got him in trouble a few times, including with the Minnesota Wild a few times. So, as you mentioned, not the most fleet of foot, but his angles are good, and especially, he was a guy that commanded, that you were whatever you were going to be on the ice with the corners in front of the net. Had good offensive ability too. Had a good shot, so he had good elements to his game. And I was slightly surprised when you look at his accolades: 3 cups, 2 Olympic golds, 2 Norris trophies, a Conn Smythe. That's a heck of a run at 38 years old. I know that Duncan Keith, you talk about the fleet of foot thing. You definitely, at that age, you lose a step or two. So I think maybe he decided that, hey, I've done what I could do, and it's time to go drink pina coladas on the beach somewhere. That's okay too.
Well, regardless of your salary, there's always a good time to do that. But
yes.
It's interesting. Duncan Keith on the other end of that line, as you mentioned, probably most remembered for the slash on Jeff Carter at center ice, and then the slash breaking Charlie Coyle's nose. A couple of stick swinging incidents on the other side. But congratulations to Duncan. Heck of a career. Wishing him the best of luck. Final topic here very quickly. Our final NHL award, the Jim Gregory General Manager of the Year. The winner was announced during round 1 of the NHL Draft this past week. Colorado's Joe Sakic was the winner by no surprise, taking the crown from Islanders' Lou Lamoriello, who won in back-to-back seasons. That's just interesting. Tampa's Julian Breezewald, New York Rangers' Chris Drury were second and third, followed by Ken Holland, Bill Zito, and who else but Bill Guerin in Edmonton, Florida, and Minnesota. And welcome into the main portion of the show, episode 119. Nick Maxton joining myself, Noah Grant. Nick, pleasure to have you on the show as always. We did mention on Twitter, for those who didn't know, that we did have a big announcement coming up on the show. Well, we had a lot happen in the hockey world. Jesus criminy, do we have a lot of stuff. So we're trying to kind of plow through the show. This information is still important, but there's a lot of developments here, but it does relate to both Nick and it does relate to our show. So we're going to kind of put that off a little bit until next week. You're not going to want to miss it. It's a really interesting topic and a lot of good things cooking in the oven from what it sounds like. So we're going to definitely push that off until next week. As far as recording times for us, we're probably going to either record record Friday night or Saturday night as usual, and a Sunday release. I'm going to imagine probably a Sunday release. As far as we know, we'll keep you updated. Find us at Warming House Den as always. But Nick, as much as I would love to talk about what you are up to with your sleeves cut off of your shirt,
nothing to talk about. Honestly,
yeah, we got some crazy stuff going on in the hockey world. So let's jump right into it. Some trade insanity. I kind of broke it down. What happened before the draft? What happened during the draft? And what happened after the draft? And during the draft, we're going to talk about the top 4 picks as well too, because apparently something happened. Let's start.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I was sleeping. I definitely wasn't sleeping. In fact, I think I was just getting off work, and then I was sleeping. But nonetheless,
Yes.
Before the draft, about a week prior-ish, Tampa Bay started us off with doing what Tampa does best. Ryan Mcdonough heading to Nashville. Good pickup for the Preds if he continues to play the way he has. He is getting a bit older. But for D-man Philippe Myers and former UND Fighting Hawk Grant Mishmash, Mcdonough has 4 years left, $6.75 million average annual value, 33 years of age. So if he can stay healthy and kind of stay in form, I think it'll be a great pickup for the Preds. For sure, for the first couple of years, I think. You never know as you push, 35, 36, 37. We'll see. Myers, 27 games last year in the show, has a lot of upside, apparently, according to Tampa. The thought was they were going to buy him out, but I don't think that's the case. And Grant Mismash has had a slightly tumultuous ride, 12 points in 57 AHL games, so still trying to find his footing there. So, Nick, let's start with this one very quickly. Tampa's not going to buy him out. Does Philippe Myers have a shot in this Lightning lineup? And is Ryan Mcdonough a great pickup for the Preds?
It is, because you need some depth behind Roman Josi and Ryan Ellis there for Nashville. And again, Ryan Mcdonough, you talk about after that trade was announced and how many teammates from Tampa, essentially were like, what in the heck? I mean, he's a leader. Yeah. He's a guy that, he doesn't speak much, but when he does, people listen. He's a guy that just leads by example. He's always been that way. Again, former Cretin-Durham All-Star here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Again, a 2-time Stanley Cup winner. He's been injured. He's been a little bit susceptible to that. He's not the best skater, but grinds, he battles, and he's a guy that will do whatever he can do to help the team. So this is a great pickup for Nashville. Tough for Tampa to see him go because, and we'll probably get to this too, more next week than we would this week. But obviously Tampa trying to clear cap space to try to re-sign Andre Palat. And it sounds like Palat may be testing free agent market. So, if this could be a time where does Tampa have cap space that they're not using LTIR on? What the hell?
It's interesting because, at some point, I'm sure we'll do a prediction of who we think is going to win the Stanley Cup next season. My bet is, I don't know who's going to win the Cup, but I can probably pick one of the finalists. Just depends wherever Corey Perry goes. Speaking of McDonough's former team, the New York Rangers, they traded netminder Alex Georgiev to Colorado for 2 third-rounders and a 5th rounder in the draft. He posted a career worst .898 save percentage in 33 games this season, 26 years of age, owns a .908 over the course of his career, certainly dampered a little bit by last season, 129 appearances over 5 NHL seasons. Darcy Kemper apparently will now test free agency for Colorado based on the cap space. So, it's, you have Pavel Francouz, who's there in Colorado right now as well. And Joe Sakic feels confident in the new addition and the current mainstay. And Darcy Kemper seems like he's on his way out. So
he is on his way out. I have some sources that tell me, mind you, Darcy Kemper's agent is Ben Hankinson, who again is based here in Edina, Minnesota. Plenty of Minnesota folks will know that name. From the information I'm hearing is that Kemper is looking at a contract at somewhere in the $5 to $6 million range.
I don't know that he's that good.
Here's the thing. I think you can make the argument that Darcy Kemper helped Colorado get to the Cup final.
For sure.
Now, on the other side of the coin, and I think this is the bigger question, Noah, I'm not sure the argument is whether he deserves that money. Now, I'm still with you. I still have my doubts.
Yeah.
But what team can afford him besides the Arizona State people?
Well, the Edmonton Oilers, who now just cleared $5.5 million in cap space and need a goalie badly.
So there you go.
It's interesting. And Darcy Kemper really has kind of claimed to fame a little bit in Los Angeles, but really when he went to Arizona is kind of when he became the reclamation project that he was. And he wasn't bad at Minnesota either. I think Minnesota Wild fans fail to realize that sure, he wasn't a lights out guy. It was maybe more of a backup guy
at the time.
Yeah, but he really was a solid 1B goaltender in the National Hockey League. Now, was he aided by a very damn good Colorado team in front of him? Absolutely.
Yes.
And was he much of a factor in the Cup final? I wouldn't go as far as to say that he was, but he got the job done. And sometimes that's all you ask of a goaltender is to not give up the poor goals. And, Andrei Vasilevsky, for example, on the other side for Tampa Bay, made some sparkling saves, but he had a little bit of shakes in the first round against Toronto, a little bit at spurts against the Rangers, and then really kind of didn't look like himself in the Stanley Cup final. Now, did he finally meet his match? And you can only do so much against a really good team like Colorado. But at the same time, Darcy Kemper, for the most part, besides really the Jan Rutta slap shot in Game 5, really didn't look like he cracked under a lot of pressure and battled through some injury pieces in the first couple of rounds too. So, he held his own. I think for me, I would say like 4.2 million a season, I think is fair for him coming off a Stanley Cup winning season. I think would be good. But let's not forget the Seattle Kraken. They grabbed a former Colorado Avalanche netminder as well and ran with that biscuit at close to $6 million per season. So the goalie market has definitely really changed when it comes to that. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. He's not coming to the Wild. I'll tell you that much.
No.
No. Let's talk about the Wild's current rival. This is just a little minor story. 24-year-old Alex DeBrincat. He's headed to Ottawa. In fact, it's already signed, sealed, and delivered for the 2022 7th overall pick. Kevin Korczynski was the selection there, a second rounder and a 2024 third rounder. Now, people are wondering about this, Nick, and I'm with you. I mean, DeBrincat is a core piece to build a team around, especially for the Hawks. And the Hawks have a storied history of giving away players for a lot less than what their value is. I mean, you look at Philip Deneau, you look at Artemi Panarin, you look at Brandon Saad until he came back and then left again. A lot of, I don't know why Chicago likes to offload some of these contracts, but here's the thing. Kevin Korczynski, 84 points in 92 contests for the Seattle Thunderbirds in the WHL.
As a defenseman.
He's a defenseman, comparable with Shea Theodore, 6'2", 185, still has a bit room to grow. The quote that was given by the organization, he's really puck friendly. He'll be a first unit power play guy, projects to be a first pairing D-man, eat some minutes. He's got a long body, so I think the ceiling is there. Character references, even from teammates that we looked at this year. He's a rink rat. He's there early shooting pucks, nicknames for everybody. He's a hockey junkie through and through. That's some high praise there. Now, I know a lot of guys at that level obviously are like that. I like the selection. He's a guy that becomes the high end of the prospect pool for Chicago. They didn't pick a bad guy with the pick that they got. They lose a hell of a hockey player in Alex DeBrincat. I think this one's going to sting if he continues to become the player that we think he's going to be. But as far as what Chicago did with the assets that they got, not terrible.
Not great either. I think they got more. And this is, and I'm going to stick to my guns here. I still think DeBrincat, his value was highest here. I still don't think. Now, granted, with Korczynski, I'm with you here. It's a great pick.
Yeah,
I don't think.
So the reason being, and sorry to interrupt you, the reason being that a lot of people think that Chicago didn't get more is there was not a guaranteed extension or re-signing from Alex DeBrincat for the Sens. So he could definitely walk in a year when his contract is up. And I think that was the one piece that stuck, that extra player or prospect or pick that you're talking about there. And I think that's why a lot of people think Chicago got fleeced. And don't get me wrong, the Hawks definitely come out on the worst side of this deal right now at the current moment. But how many times have we said that where it actually does end up panning out for a team? I think the Hawks are headed in a slightly wrong direction at the current moment. But again, you never really know until down the line. And Alex DeBrincat, I mean, you never know. He could not pan out in Ottawa. Like you have no idea at this point. But right now it looks like the Hawks did get fleeced a little bit.
Well, and here's the other thing too. We also mentioned on this show, Noah, that if they do indeed trade DeBrincat, and that wasn't their only move, they also traded Kirby Dach as well. These are two younger pieces that normally, if you're going to do a rebuild, these are the types of talents you build a team around, right? So when
DeBrincat, yes.
DeBrincat. Now, let me rephrase that slightly, because I'm not necessarily talking Kirby Dach, and in terms of his individual skill set, I'm talking about younger pieces.
Yeah.
So my query is, if you're signaling to the hockey world that I traded a 40 goal scorer in DeBrincat, I traded Kirby Dach, who's had his ups and downs. Let's be real with that, right?
We'll talk about him in just a second, by the way.
But now the spotlight is on two players, and those two players are Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves. I think you and I both know, we did a breakdown of this a couple weeks ago on the show, that they're entering their last year of $10 million deals. I think it's pretty safe to say that Chicago is signaling a full-fledged rebuild.
Yeah.
You have to think that way.
Do Kane and Taves really have anything to prove? They both have 3 Stanley Cups to their name. They've done everything in Chicago sweater to be done.
That's what I mean. And I think, honestly, the player that is more tradable is Patrick Kane. I think he has more left in the tank to prove. I think Jonathan Taves is sort of like the namesake. I think he sticks around. I don't think, again, he missed a whole season. He still hasn't been the same player.
He's like a middle six guy. He's like maybe a third line centerman on a team that's looking for a rental to go all the way,
Right. I would think it would be hard for the team to trade Jonathan Taves.
Retaining salary would have to be a big,
probably, especially this year. But I would imagine that one, if not both of those, are definitely got the spotlight on them now. And for Chicago, my goodness, I'm not sure the wrong direction, but again, you talk about a team that had one hell of a decade, 3 Stanley Cups, 2010, 2013, 2015. Again, at some point, we talked about Pittsburgh earlier. They're trying to avoid this, per se, the changing of the guard. But Chicago, it sounds like they made the decision that that's where they're headed. I think they could have gotten more. I think they probably should have done a sign-in trade that would have helped them get more assets back. And I'm also a little surprised too, Noah, they didn't get any immediate help back. It was all draft picks. And so I think, again, when you talk about what they get back, what does that signal? I think it does really, in my mind, cement the fact that this is indeed a lot more to come from Chicago as we head through this next season.
First big move for Kyle Davidson at the helm in the general manager position. So that was all before Thursday morning. The NHL draft was held that day, and the top pick ended up not being the top pick, depending on who you ask. The Montreal Canadiens, Slavkovsky from Finland, a left winger. He was the first overall pick. I think, I don't know if you would say he was the better player, but it seemed like he was a guy who maybe checked more of the boxes for a lot of teams, especially as we got closer to the draft. Of course, Shane Wright, exceptional status. He fell to 4th for the Seattle Kraken. Nemec, who fell to number 2 for the New Jersey Devils, a defenseman, and then Logan Cooley, the future Minnesota Golden Gopher, who is actually going to have twice as much seating in the current building he's about to play as the team that drafted him, the Arizona Coyotes. It's interesting, Nick, because Shane Wright could very well be a great pickup for the Seattle Kraken, and they still get a very quality player in him, moving into that 4th spot. And his quote, he was very positive and upbeat and said, you know what, I'm going to go out and get it, and I'm going to be the player they look back 20 years later in this draft class and be the best player in this draft. I love that confidence from him. But you kind of got the sense, especially once Montreal went with Slavkovsky, that like they did, you knew that it was about to be an interesting shakeup. New Jersey needed a defenseman badly. They went for their defenseman, the guy that they felt was going to be the best fit for the organization. Normally you draft best available, but sometimes when you have a couple of guys who are, top 4 or 5, top tier, a league above the rest, you kind of look at those guys and say, best available, sure, but maybe best available by position still might be the right play here for this group.
Nothing that's separated from those maybe 2 to 5 spots.
Exactly. Yeah. And the Arizona Coyotes, I think, probably did the majority of their scouting on Logan Cooley, expecting that he might be their guy at number 3, and really liked the package that they saw. And the Seattle Kraken maybe felt like maybe they got a gift at number 4. We'll have to see. So, was it intriguing for you that Shane Wright fell to 4, or was there more to this than meets the eye?
I think last week when Bob McKenzie posted his final draft rankings, that's really where the shakeup began.
Yeah, Corey Pronman too from The Athletic.
Yes, yeah. And the big thing that we saw, and this was sort of an agreement, and it's being misconstrued a little bit, Noah, because Shane Wright, he's not the smallest guy by any means, but they talked a little bit about sort of, I don't know if work ethic is the right way to put it, but essentially winning battles. Yeah. Slavkovsky for Montreal, he's a power forward. He's a guy that a couple of folks, and I did some reading on this, I was looking for a reason why this happened, right? You always look at why Shane Wright, who had been sort of the written in
for 3 years,
goes to number 4. And to be fair, for 3 years, you kind of get picked over like a fine-tooth comb. Probably. Yeah. There's probably a little bit of, just too much attention to it. Yeah. Number 2, I think there's an expectation from both scouts and from folks who follow the game closely that when you are a projected number 1 pick, that you still are growing and you're growing above your other peers in your class. And it appeared that a lot of scouts agreed that there was nothing that really separated Shane Wright from the other 4. And it's not a knock on Shane Wright, but unlike, say, the Connor McDavid draft, the Austin Matthews draft, where you had a clear number 1 player that no matter you needed the defenseman, needed a goalie, whatever have you were picking this player because this was a generational talent. This wasn't this draft, and you sort of touched on it with Logan Cooley and New Jersey, where you could have gone with best available, but if you look at positions 2 through 6, there really wasn't a whole lot that separated them. So you go by position of need, which New Jersey did. So it's interesting. I thought that some of the comments, were interesting too, just the way it was presented. I think a lot of people thought, oh, this guy must be lazy. And I don't know if it's laziness with him, maybe just the way he plays the game. Maybe he's just not a guy that plays physical hockey.
Yeah, and he didn't. Yes, he was one of the few guys that granted exceptional status, but besides that, he didn't have that extra pop in the year leading up to the draft. And I think sometimes you look for that in a number 1, overall potential guy that just has that extra gear when it matters leading up to the draft day. But 4th overall, I mean, like we talked about,
good.
in 10 years could make absolutely no difference. And the Steve Dangle podcast made a reference to the 2011 NHL draft where the top 4 guys were all ranked number 1 at some point. Who were they? Number 1, Edmonton, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, followed by Colorado's Gabriel Landeskog, Florida's Jonathan Huberdeau, who just set a record for most assists by a left winger in an NHL season, and number 4, New Jersey's Adam Larson, Ryan Strome, Mika Zibanejad, Mark Scheifele, Sean Couturier, Dougie Hamilton, and Jonas Brodin rounding out the top 10. How about that one? So
the draft.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're talking about, you never really know until you know, and once you know, it's long gone and long over. So again, we'll have to see. But, I'm wishing all those guys the best. What an exciting day for them. And you hope that they do well with their respective teams. And will we see a Kraken Canadiens rivalry? Who knows?
Well, there's not an offer sheet involved.
Yeah. Yeah, don't even get me started. Well, let's move back to our pals. Same day, Chicago moved 21-year-old Kirby Dach. How about that? He's been in the league 3 years. He's 21. 2019 3rd overall to Montreal for the 13th pick. Frank Nazar and 66th overall picks in the recent draft. So another good pick for Chicago. You never know how they'll pan out. Montreal got the 13th overall pick that they acquired actually in this same trade from the New York Islanders for defenseman Alex Romanov in the 98th overall pick. So Kirby Dach had 26 points in 70 games this season. Romanov on the back end had 13 points in 79 games played. He's age 22. So you talk about the direction for the Chicago Blackhawks. Kirby Dach, we'll have to see if he pans out. I think there's a lot of upside to his game, and he's still kind of clay that has yet to be fully molded here. Is Montreal the right place? We'll have to see. For some guys, it is the right spot, and other guys, the hockey mecca can be a little bit overwhelming. So we'll have to see if he can take his game to the next level. I think he'll do well under Marty St. Louis, just a guy that, knows the game inside and out. So cruising through the rest of what happened on Thursday, Toronto moving Peter Mrazek, the 25th overall pick as well, which was Sam Renzel, to Chicago for the 38th overall pick. Mrazek, $3.8 million a year for 2 more years. I think it's because you have a couple of UFAs maybe testing the market for Chicago. I've got no idea on the goaltending side, but that one was, it was what it was. Edmonton, 31-year-old Zach Kassian and the 29th overall pick, which was Maverick Lamoureux. What a great hockey name that is.
That's a hell of a name.
Yeah. And a 2024 third rounder and a 2025 second rounder, which is a lot of packaging, to Arizona for the 32nd overall pick, which was Reed Schaefer, who had 32 goals in 66 games for Seattle in the WHL, the final pick of the first round. So kind of a bit of a heavy package from the Oilers and Ken Holland, but they must have really liked their man that they saw there. So Oilers still in desperate search of a goalie there on that side. A couple of teams that aren't, as we started Friday off, by the way, second day of the draft, Detroit setting the 73rd overall pick to St. Louis for goaltender Ville Husso. I thought this was a fleecing by Stevie Y.
This was completely fleeced.
Yeah, 3 years, $14.25 million signing for the Red Wings' new netminder. 40 games played, 25-7-6 on the season, and a .919 save percentage. Stevie Y, man, at it again.
Yes, he is. And what a goaltending duo now for the Red Wings. Ville Husso and Alex Nedeljkovic, two younger goaltenders. Defense was a big problem for the Red Wings last year as a whole. So trying to address it that way with maybe a little bit more of a goaltending competition. I like the move. And again, how about St. Louis? What about this? And I think, but seriously,
no, you're right, though. Yeah.
It's interesting because this was where Ville Husso almost, effectively stole the job over Jordan Binnington. I wouldn't say he kind of faltered in the playoffs, but it wasn't. He's still a young goaltender, so it was kind of. I don't know if it was. I don't know if you want to say the word anticipated, but it happens.
It goes back to your Darcy Kemper situation. They signed that man to $6 million per season. They got to stick with their guns on this one because that's not a movable contract right now. Correct. And I think they got to say that Binnington's their guy. They kind of handcuff themselves a little bit, and they lose a very good goaltending prospect. They got something in return, but not much.
Not much.
Yeah, Washington, netminder Vitek Vanacek in the 46th overall pick headed to New Jersey for picks 37 and 70. Vanacek, 20-12 on the season, a 2.67 goals against average and a .908 save percentage. The save percentage is a little bit low, but not terrible. This could turn out to be maybe a diamond in the rough for the Devils.
And Devils are looking, again, you talk about their biggest area of need is in between the pipes. And for Vanacek, who competed for the number one job for Washington, didn't really take hold of it. He's going to have a really good opportunity in New Jersey to do that in front of a squad that's going to have a lot of expectations this year. And it could be, let's just say one way or another, some things could be majorly changed there in New Jersey if things don't improve.
Could be worse. You could bring Corey Schneider back. Carolina moved defenseman Tony DeAngelo to Philadelphia for a 2024 second, a 2023 third, and a fourth overall, a fourth round pick, from Friday's selections this past Friday. DeAngelo.
So much. My God.
Well,
what are you doing?
Chuck Fletcher, what a guy. 2 years left, $5 million per year. Did have 51 points in 64 games. So offensively, he's strong. His defensive metrics are not great, and he's a polarizing person in general. So, Chuck Fletcher.
They asked him about that. They asked Chuck Fletcher about, the so-called the facade of Tony DeAngelo, and he essentially said something to the tune is like, well, he had some bad stuff in the past, but I think he's learned from it, and I think he's over that hump, essentially almost making the case of a maturity issue kind of thing. We'll have to see, but that's so many picks for the freaking defense. Anyway, that's a Chuck Fletcher move. The Flyers are secretly on fire, and I don't think it's a very well-kept secret at the current moment. They're burning incineration. Yes. Yeah. It's not good.
After the draft, really only one trade to talk about. Former Minnesota Wild first-rounder Luke Kunin from Nashville moving to San Jose for forward John Leonard and a 2023 third-round pick. Kunin, 22 points this past season. A pending RFA whose qualifying offer right now is $2.3 million. He's 24 years of age. Meanwhile, John Leonard, 23 years of age, 15 points in 58 NHL games. So that was kind of the only notable one at the time of recording. Moving on to the last real tidbit of our show, and I know we're running a little bit long in the main portion, but this is going to kind of lead us into our extra ice session, which is all Minnesota Wild. But we have to start with the backstory before we get to the Minnesota Wild side of things, and that is the big news that has been circulating around the NHL and hockey world this past week. Flyers prospect Ivan Fetatov now at a remote military base in northern Russia with apparently the Russian Navy, as far as we can tell. How did this all start? Who is Ivan Fetatov? A lot of things going on here. We'll break it down. And Nick, I want to get your expose and a half on this one for sure. So,
oh boy.
So buckle up here. 25-year-old Fetatov, considered one of the top goaltenders in the world outside the NHL, was really raw when the Flyers drafted him in the 7th round. They expected him to compete for a spot on their roster next to Carter Hart next season. A silver medalist as the Russian starting goaltender at the Beijing Olympics, and led CSKA Moscow to the Gagarin Cup as KHL champion. So, the kind of a little bit of misconception. So let's clear some of these things up here. So playing hockey, especially for CSKA, which stands for Central Sports Club of the Army, which was founded as the Soviet's Army hockey team in 1946, still has some pretty traditional ties to the military even now. Playing hockey for them is not considered part of the required now 1 year of military service required of Russian men. So these tweets originally kind of aired, though, from what had happened to Fetatov from Carl Manson at Carl_KHL on Twitter. Tweets read this, and there were 3 of them. Number 1, per Russian media, Fetatov fell ill during the detainment at a military enlistment office. So he was training in St. Petersburg, and they picked him up, essentially, and because he had declared that he wanted to sign with Philadelphia. He had to be taken away with an ambulance. Knowing the Russians' regime's usual treatment of its own citizens, I hope Fetatov is all right. Fetatov's lawyer said, quote, he doesn't feel very well. He says that he was given some kind of injections, which he does not know. He was told that this was prescribed by a doctor. He doesn't look good, end quote. We don't know much more, but it's worrying when this happens to an athlete in custody. And the final tweet said, Ivan complained of stomach pain and possible poisoning while he was in the military commissariat of St. Petersburg, after which he was taken to a medical institution. This came from a reporter at Match TV. If it is really a poisoning, this will be in line with Putin's regime and horrible. So that's part 1 of this saga. So let's start with that here, Nick. Obviously, a shitty situation that this kid has just made an example of. And, the NHL's hands are tied. The Flyers' hands are tied. Really, the entire Western world is tied on this one. And Fetatov is just put in a very unfortunate position. And you hope that his 1 year of service is only indeed 1 year. But, with everything going on in Russia, obviously, it's difficult. Your first reactions on this and really, what does this mean to the hockey world in light of things that just don't really pertain to how you play the game?
It's a political chess piece. It's exactly what this is. And it's sad because you're doing it to a young kid. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, from what we know of Putin's regime, which I don't know if we really know everything, the fact that we can say that this seems to follow a behavioral pattern, mm-hmm. that part seems to hold true from what we know. And I think what's scary about this is, again, we've seen it with Alex Novelski, the opposition leader that was recently jailed, a year or 2 ago, maybe, and some of the things that he went through. A lot of striking similarities to the way that things are being handled, to some of the complaints that we're hearing in terms of, being offered injections. I shouldn't say offered, they were given injections. Mm-hmm. This is concerning on a multitude of levels. Now, to add a layer to this, Noah, from what some of the reporting initially has come up, it sounds like a lot of NHL squads, even the NHL themselves, were essentially telling Russian-born or Russian-bound players to not go back overseas.
Yeah.
And effectively, this was the fear that someone or some people would be made an example. And the reason why I started off this response is by a political chess piece. This is exactly what this is. It's too bad that we have that's, I think if there's anything that bothers me about social media is when we talk about sports and then all of a sudden things happen in the world and we talk about them, and it may have a political landscape to that topic, and they say stick with sports. Well, last I checked, I still live in the same frickin' country that you do, and I have every frickin' right to talk about it, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
This affects all of us. And it's sad that somebody who has spent hours and hours trying to perfect his craft, that gets a shot that most of us dream of, to be drafted and to be a part of an NHL squad, is now being used as essentially a political pawn to try to force the hand of other governments.
Yeah. And this could completely derail his career. Like,
completely.
You
Yes.
know, it's terrifying. Now, the Minnesota Wild obviously have a keen interest in this, not only in terms of hockey in general, but their star player, Kirill Kaprizov. And the report coming out the other day, he was denied entrance to the United States twice. First attempting to enter from Dubai, but then was turned away. Later tried to cross the ocean by way of the Caribbean islands, but still was not permitted entry. So then he did return to Russia. He is safe at home with his family. Part of this, it sounds like Kaprizov actually never got a chance to secure his work visa, which they were never given the year before because of the way that the pandemic was still going on at that particular time. So getting people into the country was a little bit of a different challenge. Sounds like he was turned away by actually the United States and the Emirates and other countries, as opposed to maybe trying to get out of Russia. But there were a couple things that came out of this. And the first coming from Michael Russo, who said, asked how concerned a source thought that Kaprizov could be forced to remain in Russia. This source, knowledgeable of the ongoings, said that,
and in Russia.
Yeah, said that he's not, unless it's coming straight from the top, and you know who I mean. If it's coming from Putin, and he says Kirill's not going anywhere, then he's not going anywhere. If it comes from anyone else, don't worry about it. But if he comes from the top, that's what's going to happen. Only one person can make him stay. Is it possible? There's a small chance. What are you going to do if you're going to make an example of? So we talked about Fetatov, who's going to be in the AHL, potentially, or a star that's in the National Hockey League right now. If you want to make the news, you grab the best one you can. If push comes to shove, he's in good standing right now, but if push comes to shove and they want to make an example of him, they will. They'll forget about everything else that he's done, all the good things he's done for the country. It's clear Russia's trying to pressure NHL players right now not to leave. This is not going to be exclusive to Kirill Kaprizov. And you talked about it where, a lot of these teams were saying not to go home. And it was kind of somewhat of a laughing stock by a lot of these teams and a lot of players where they're like, well, we're so far removed from what's going on in Ukraine and everything that's going on within Russia as well that, why would this affect us? We're just athletes. It's not a laughing matter anymore.
No. And that's I don't know if you're going to call it the tunnel vision by these athletes, and I'm not, it's not a disrespectful call by any means, but it maybe is a slight underestimation of, how you can be a marked person, and you may have, again, you're so far removed from the situation that's happening in Russia, but I think you don't take into account some of the things that where you can be some political muscle. And Kaprizov is arguably public enemy number one, quote unquote, if you're going to be Vladimir Putin and you really want to put a statement down. If you are trapped in a corner and you want to make something happen, this guy's right. And I don't know. Here's the thing that I don't agree with. I don't think it just comes from Putin. I don't think that. I don't think it's only that person. I think that there is some communication within Russia that is making some people feel more relaxed. Than I think it actually is a lot more strenuous than I think they're being led to believe.
And we talk about really the oligarchy, the really kind of that group of people and Putin's most trusted people. And that I think has put a lot of athletes and a lot of others at a difficult spot where either they don't want to say anything or they're almost, like you mentioned, being put in a position where they're relaxed and feel like they can say something and stand up to it. And then it turns out that they're essentially being kind of set up a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that's the fear. I think that's the fear is, the athletes themselves feel like they're scotch free. And the reality is, when you have the history that Putin does in his regime, you have the way that they will essentially utilize any method to get what they want. There's nothing that's safe in this situation. And again, when you are interfering with a multi-billion-dollar business as the NHL and marketing power and the Minnesota Wild, right? And I don't have to tell anybody of our listeners this: the Minnesota Wild are not the same team if Kaprizov was not on the ice. Despite the public comments, don't tell me that there is some panic and some night sweats that are happening every single night in St. Paul, as well as the NHL offices in New York and in Toronto. This is, and you hope that we look back on this in a couple of months, knowing we maybe laugh about it because nothing came to it. But this, unfortunately, with Fetatov, it's proven that there's a reason to worry, and it could be. And the real question is who's next, and that's the scary part.
Yeah, definitely. And someone that maybe is potentially very well known within the National Hockey League. So with that, we are going to wrap up the main portion of the show. We do have a little bit of a small piece to touch on Kaprizov later in our extra ice session. We are going to talk all things Minnesota Wild and talk about the week that they've had, some maybe angry goaltenders as well, and how the NHL draft went for the squad. Extra ice session here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Myself, Noah Grant, alongside Nick Maxon. You can find him at the Puckscribe on Twitter. Myself at SCSU Hockey 91. The Minnesota Wild, they signed some players. They drafted some players. They're arguing a little bit. And like you mentioned, there's a lot of worry going on within this club about some of their personnel. So let's start with kind of the first news that came out this past week. Love this signing by the team. Minnesota adding defenseman Jake Middleton, 3 years, $2.45 million per year, 26 years of age, completed his first full season in the National Hockey League between the Sharks playing heavy minutes and then the Minnesota Wild being essentially a second pairing defenseman-ish, however you want to kind of call it.
In the top four.
Yeah, love this signing. Love it.
Yeah, great signing. Really paired well with Spurgeon, a right shot defenseman who's, I think, picked up a little bit more of the offensive ability that was kind of scouted on by the Minnesota Wild in the playoffs. And again, I think just a great, kind of almost a natural fit there with the club. So I think that in a great term, great value for both Middleton as well as the team. It was a no-brainer, I think, to a lot of folks following the situation, and glad that Bill Guerin and the Wild got it done.
Yeah, excited, obviously, for that signing. Another one that maybe was a little bit eye-catching for a variety of reasons. Let's start with number one here. The Wild bringing back Marc-Andre Fleury, 2 years, $3.5 million average annual value at age 37. He has made the playoff for 16 straight seasons, which is the longest streak by a goaltender in National Hockey League history. Cam Talbot, he didn't like that.
At least that's what we're led to believe.
Yeah, 1 year left at $3.66 million. So this is coming first thing here. Per Elliot Friedman, Cam Talbot's representatives have met with general manager Bill Guerin a couple of times on the weekend, and Guerin has said publicly he wants to bring them both back. Talbot, he hasn't spoken yet, but the word is he's definitely unhappy, and the message has been conveyed. So Talbot's agent, George Bezos, to TSN's Pierre LeBrun had stated, "We both stated our positions, and Billy Guerin has a lot to think about." And I love this. GM Bill Guerin to Michael Russo of The Athletic, he says, "I don't have shit to do. Cam Talbot's under contract. George can say whatever the hell he wants. My team's set right now, and that's the way it goes. We can have all the discussions we want. Cam's a member of our team. We really like Cam. All we're trying to do is win." So Cam Talbot went 32-12-4 with a .911 save percentage. Lost his lone game in the postseason, allowing 4 goals in Game 6. He hadn't played in 2 weeks before that point.
That won't help.
Yeah, Marc-Andre Fleury, 9-2 since joining the Wild, a .910 save percentage during that time. A .906 save percentage and a .306 goals against average, going 2-3 in the postseason. So, and I can understand Talbot being understandably chapped that Dean Everson didn't play him more in the playoffs after having an all-star season. And that's kind of my position. You had an all-star season. Next year's a new leaf. If you want to be the number one guy, go out and earn it. But Marc-Andre Fleury, a big namesake, obviously going to drive some ticket revenue, at least a little bit, I think. And maybe has a chance to maybe push to be that guy. I mean, he is a year and change removed from a Vezina winning season. So, I think it's a great 1-2 tandem if Cam Talbot can find a way to find where he's supposed to be in this mix. But I mean, is this all overblown, or are the boys going to figure it out? Is there some dogfighting in the clubhouse here, Nick?
Here's my thing. And as we know, goaltenders are different breeds. That's just the name of the game, aka Ilya Bryzgalov, and just don't be around bears. But when you bring in Marc-Andre Fleury at the trade deadline, don't tell me that Cam Talbot had to think, okay, sure, they're bringing another guy in. This guy's he's won a couple cups. All right, this is probably still my net. I can understand why Cam's upset. He had a hell of a season. He had an all-star season. At the end of the day, this isn't something that is, he shouldn't have any fodder against Marc-Andre Fleury. He shouldn't have, if anything, it should be fodder on for Dean Evason. Mm-hmm. Because again, with Billy Gias, I've got a 1A and a 1A2 essentially in my back pocket. Goaltending for me is not going to be an issue.
The newest Midwestern steak sauce.
Right. But it's, this goes back to Dean Evason, to how does he handle this tandem? It's going to be interesting because they're both, as we've seen, very capable goaltenders. Do they split it 50-50? Or do they start there and then does one take over the helm? I think the bigger question, Noah, is say Cam Talbot is so unhappy, or say his numbers drop, do you trade him? And if you do, Fleury left one more year. I know you're trying to essentially buy time for Jesper Wallstedt, their first-round pick from last year. But as we know in the hockey world, the latest development player position is the goaltending position. Are the Wild playing with fire here a bit? Almost a little bit. But at the end of it, why wouldn't you want a great goaltending duo as a teammate to know that, okay, someone falters, I got someone to pick up, or if someone gets injured.
But it's competition, and
right.
And that's the thing is, like, Cam Talbot, regardless of the season he had last year, he was an all-star, and he was an all-star with a .911 save percentage. Yeah. He had a great season last year. I think it's surely to be said. He's entering his age 35 season, and he's entering a contract year regardless of how he played with Minnesota. He still has to earn it this year, regardless of if Marc-Andre Fleury was there or not. And part of me is kind of like, as a hockey player, you have a unique position, for the most part, a little bit less in the NHL because general managers and head coaches obviously have an input in that particular situation. Sure. But you have a unique situation compared to fans and armchair GMs alike, in where you can actually do something about it. You can actually bring that pent-up frustration into the way you play, and you can make a difference for better or worse in your own situation there. And, I think that's just what Cam Talbot has to do. I mean, he can come in and completely earn a spot and be the guy and play 60 games this season and relegate Marc-Andre Fleury to a very expensive backup role. We'll never know until we really get the season rolling. But the boys are going to have to figure it out. And like you mentioned, I think most Wild fans are excited to have that 1A, 1B tandem, and knowing that on any given night, you might have a goalie that gives you a chance to win. I think Marc-Andre Fleury is a slight overpay, but I think that was something that had to be had for him to stay in Minnesota. He got his money. Now we're going to have to see if he can be, worth the money. And he's also somebody that should, in a year and a half, should the Wild maybe not be a contender with their salary cap issues, he's a guy that can maybe be offloaded to a team and have one more run at a Stanley Cup. So a lot of options for Minnesota here that are both good and bad, depending on how this all shakes out. It's going to be intriguing. Minnesota now has $1.434 million in cap space, Nick. Marco Rossi is expected to make the jump, which is about $875K, leaving more room for someone else to jump in. Sounds like Nick Delorier is garnering a lot of interest and is definitely going to test the free agent market, as is Nick Bukestad. First of all, right now as it sits, what does Minnesota do with that cap space, if anything? Do they have to offload one of these defensive contracts that they just signed, for example, a Kulikov type thing? What do they do at the forward position? Can they really do anything?
$1.4 million is not enough cap space.
Yeah.
It is not, because you got to remember too, for call-ups and all these other things, that is part of your cap calculation. It's a big reason why a lot of NHL squads have hired literally like salary cap experts to deal with this on a daily basis. Because you got to remember too, the salary cap number is almost like daily interest. It's something that's calculated daily.
Yeah, it fluctuates a lot. So, a lot of teams have gone to experts in this field. But what I can tell you that doesn't need an expert opinion is 1.4 is not enough cushion for injuries, call-ups. It just isn't. So I think the spotlight a little bit turns on to Mcdonough a little bit, or does it turn to Kalen Addison, right? So you feel like that Bill Guerin has something left up his sleeve here?
I think you almost do. Question is and it's tough because Mcdonough has served very admirably for this squad. He's definitely not the same defenseman he was when I think he was at his best 2 years ago before that chest injury. He's just not been the same since then.
Yeah.
But then again, if he knows that, so is the rest of the league, which means, can you offload a $6 million contract, even though it's only a 1-year term? A lot of teams, again, are against the cap, even without some really tough, salary recapture situations that Minnesota is in. This is a tough call. And we pick Mcdonough because he's been sort of the lightning rod of this, but you mentioned Dmitry Kulikov as another option. Who knows? But I do feel there's more that can be done here. And I think the Minnesota Wild are going to have to create some other cap space because, again, that's just not enough to get you through the season.
Yeah, our last topic before we really break down what was arguably a pretty good draft for the Minnesota Wild, I thought. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned some tough decisions. Nick, obviously, a guy who signed for 4 more seasons, including this upcoming one here. We talked about it a little bit in the main show, but I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this because, albeit it's something that we don't want to think about and something that we hope to gosh never happens. What do the Wild do if Kirill Kaprizov doesn't return next season but is still under contract?
This is not just a team question. This is an NHL question. Because let's just say he is Fetatov 2.0, it gets sent up to the same Russian naval base, right? The league has to look at this in terms of, okay, first of all, do you still get to pay him? Does his salary still count against the cap?
Yeah, because theoretically he's technically missing time as a player. Like he's technically not attending team events.
Technically.
Yeah.
So do you slide the contract a year? Do you burn the year of the contract? There is, I would imagine, a team in the NHL office working on this exact plan. We both know that this team is not the same without Kaprizov. And depending on what the NHL would have in place, and I would hope that they would have something in place as a worst case doomsday scenario for this, is what can we give as like an exemption or something to allow Minnesota to do something. That's $9 million in cap space that I would think they would have to allow Minnesota to spend, because especially if he's being held, you can't touch it. He's in Russia, ain't going to do it.
And that's where the fear is multifold. Obviously, you want him back here being able to play the game of hockey, but should he not, and you have that money to technically potentially spend, if the NHL lets you as well too, it might only and hopefully would be in that situation for a year. So you don't really have anything that you can do long term with that either. And
how about this? That's assuming this is bookended nicely. Say this happens a couple months in, and all of a sudden he is released and he's allowed back in the U.S. Then what happens? This is a very dynamic and very complicated situation. And I mean, you'd have to find something to replace the offense. Oh, right. We just traded that. Yeah, I'm triggering Wild fans. It's fine. Had to do it. I get it. But at the end of it, I don't know if we know the answer to this. And I'll say it this. I hope we never have to. I hope that we never have to, in the, like, say 5 or 6 weeks, end of August, state fair time, right? Here in the great state of Minnesota, that we are not having to contemplate NHL exemption rules for players that are stuck in Russia. I mean, Alex Ovechkin, from what we understand, is over there as well. So this isn't just a Kaprizov question. There's multiple other Russian athletes that are in Russia currently that may be subject to this, hopefully a situation that we won't have to ever deal with, but maybe where they can't come back to the U.S. And so we're going to have to wait and see. But that would put a nice giant bow for a lot of the Minnesota Wild doubters out there on the buyouts of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. How Minnesota would this be to finally get your star player and have all the COVID situations happen, and then this, a geopolitical event that's out of your control, but is taking away your best star player. This is a Minnesota thing to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. A tumultuous situation, and it kind of obviously is worrisome that Kaprizov's name is the first one that's really kind of out there in bulk as far as NHL superstars or current NHL players. But like you mentioned, hopefully we hear, for State Fair time or around there at least, and hopefully we're celebrating more than just the great corn dogs. Things to celebrate.
Pops.
Yeah. Things to celebrate though, as we hit our last topic of the show. Corey Pronman, writer for The Athletic, did rank the 2022 Minnesota Wild draft class, and we're going to react to that here. So I'm going to go from the back end up. And kind of go backwards from the picks of the Minnesota Wild. Have had the 2004 5'10", 181-pound Servac Petrovsky, 181 pounds. Kind of has a chance outside looking in here. So solid all around forward. Has a chance. Is a dynamic guy with a lot of assets. So a later round potential. Never discount those later rounds. Just ask Kirill Kaprizov fans.
Ask Pavel Datsyuk and Henry Zetterberg.
Yeah, so a bit of an undersized guy, but really plays with a lot of speed and skill. So he's kind of interesting and a good little guy to take a chance on in the later rounds at 185th overall.
How about this, real quick, just to give you a comparison? Sam Hench is with a 7th round pick as well.
Yeah, so I heard he played for some college team that we like. 153, David Spacek, which just sounds like a hockey name.
Is it? Yeah. Miroslav Spacek's son.
Smart two-way defenseman. Kind of so ties, not a lot of offensive upside, so NHL role kind of a bit questionable. But we'll have to see. The 2003 6'0", 174-pound defenseman there. At number 121, this is moving into I believe round four. Yeah. Ryan Healy, Sioux Falls in the USHL, 6'0" as well, 172 pounds, a 2004. A little bit more of a clear NHL talent, good skater, good speed, pushes the pace really well, good hands, very creative with the puck, kind of a playmaking guy, but the hockey IQ side is a little bit lacking, and defensively a little bit stronger on the puck, things that are teachable. Which is an exciting piece here. So, maybe a potential upside in that round as well, too. So, September 21st, 2002, that's the birth date of our next guy at 5'10", 185. Michael Milne of Winnipeg in the WHL, 19 years of age, a little bit older in this draft class. After going undrafted the previous season, a pretty intellectual forward and a very gritty forward at that. Kind of, maybe reminds me of maybe like a Joel Eriksson Ek a little bit, a guy that battles, maybe isn't the fastest guy out there. You kind of wonder about the skill set though, and that was the knock on Eriksson Ek for a long time, is does he have the dynamic skill to be able to be a producer in the National Hockey League? So, that kind of pushes us in a little bit. I believe that's rounds 3 through 6 right there. So Nick, as we kind of get to that point, is there anybody that really stands out to you, or do you have any thoughts about these guys? Obviously the lower tier guys, a lot harder to project. I mean, it's all difficult, but I think especially as you get into the lesser known, so to speak, it becomes a little bit more interesting.
It does. And at the end of the day, they're draft picks. They have, you're betting on not what they're now, but what they can build, what their ceiling is, right? So it's exciting times. I like the fact that there was, I think, only 2 defensemen that were drafted So a lot of forwards in this draft, not a single goaltender the Minnesota Wild picked because, well, they seem to have their guy from last year. But one thing that's concerning, and I think we'll address this more in the top 2 rounds here, is there's still a position to meet that they still really haven't addressed yet. No, at least from the immediate side of things. But again, I like the picks. I think Judd Brackett, again, the director of amateur scouting, does a great job. And no complaints from here on rounds 3 through 7.
Yeah, like you mentioned, a center in round 7, a right-hand defenseman in round 6, another right-hand defenseman in round 5, and then a left winger in round number 4. So that position has only been addressed once. Take a wild guess which one that is. And hey, it was in the later rounds so far. Left wing coming in at number 56, the second pick of round number 2 from Okotoks in the AJHL, Riga Lorenz. Actually, Okotoks, one of the former Minot Minotauros that played last season, playing in that same league too. So 2004, 6'2", 194, big body here. Yeah. A top scoring forward in the league representing Canada in the U18s and is committed to the University of Denver. So NCHC fans are going to get a good long look at this player. A big winger that actually has some pretty soft set of hands and a really nice release on his shot. Maybe relies on it a bit too much. And is an okay skater. Maybe a bottom 6 guy, bottom 9 guy. Potentially in the National Hockey League, but as we know, the NCHC is a breeding ground for some really good development. And hey, why don't you join the defending national champions? Why don't you?
Big day for Denver in the draft deal. Wow.
Yeah, big day for them. If you ask Alex Micheletti, the Mavericks as well from Minnesota State, but who really cares about that?
I don't.
Yeah. How about number 47, Hunter Height, Barry in the OHL, another 2004 at 5'10", 174. He's a guy that his skating isn't the greatest, but his hockey sense compete. The way he handles the puck. He didn't really have the biggest year, I think, that guys, were kind of expecting. Did go to the U18 camp for Canada. A good one-on-one player with the puck skills as well, and a guy that thinks really well in all areas of the ice, especially the perimeter. Kind of is a guy who creates offense, so to speak, and those guys don't exactly grow on trees. So a little bit undersized, but has a lot of skill. But he's a guy that maybe has a little bit more work to do to kind of fill into his body and really generate that NHL power in your body. That is for a lot of guys who play in the NHL, hard work and God-given, a good healthy mix of both. So at number 47 here, those are your second round selections, Nick. Is there any thoughts that you have on these two guys? You have a centerman at number 47 and a left winger in Riga Lorenz.
The thing that intrigues me is when you talk about the selections where they're undersized, 5'10", but yet they have this dog compete level. Reminds me of someone. You can't teach that. That's the thing that's unteachable. When you talked about, rounds 3 through 7 and, how there's definitely still some room for growth in the game, right? Even at, a number 1 overall pick, they're not perfect players when they enter their professional hockey careers. And, as a smaller player in the NHL, the way that the game has sort of evolved, especially the last 15 years, right? There's more room for players of that size. And especially if you're not afraid to get your nose dirty a little bit. And I love the fact that when you talk about a player that is 5'10", he's still got some good meat. Was it 180 or 175? Back to the profile.
174 for Hunter Height and then 194 for Riga Lorenz.
Okay, so 174 for Hunter. I still think that there's a big ceiling there. One of the big things about the number 1 overall pick that they liked, and we talked about this earlier, was the fact that he was a guy that he was a competitor. He was a battle dog. And if you can have that and just refine some skill, he's going to be a solid player. And again, you can't teach that willingness and that just taking on the initiative to go into a corner or to be able to battle in front of the net. You just don't teach that. It's just something that you just decide to do. The stick handling work, the skating, you can go to the weight room, those things you can control, but a lot less of the control in terms of the battle willingness. So I'd love to see that in the second round pick, and that's something that jumped up to me.
Minnesota Wild talking about how they got both their guys they wanted in the first round. Let's start from the front end backwards, because the intriguing pick, I think, is at 24, but the number 19 pick coming from the Los Angeles Kings in the Kevin Fiala deal. That's the last time we'll mention it, I promise. Liam Ogran from the Swedish Junior League, a January 04, 6'1", 201 pounds. That's an NHL body in the making there. Kind of projected as maybe a middle six guy, player comparable as Alex Iafallo, a goal per game player in the J20 league in Sweden, limited minutes in the SHL as well, played for Sweden's U18 team and the U20 team in November. So a good goal scorer, but really the kind of traits for him that are exciting is he scores in a variety of ways from a variety of different situations. Generates a lot of offense in high danger areas, which he should. And he's a smart puck mover, but he's a shooter and kind of a bulldog in the corners, and that's exactly what Alex Iafallo was. In the NHL and maybe a little bit before it, if you know what I mean. So it's skating is all right. Again, we talked about kind of a bigger body for his age group. And it is a pure finisher a little bit in a lot of respects. A good hard F1 who maybe puts around some grease pan goals around the net, maybe hung around with Dave Shayak a little bit and we didn't know it. So, he's an interesting pick here. So let's talk about each of these picks individually. Liam Ogran, maybe wasn't a guy that maybe stuck out on the draft board, but he's a guy that projects maybe as a solid player and kind of fits the Minnesota Wild brand a little bit.
He does, and I believe I looked at his stats correctly. 33 goals last season, so he was still a pretty good producer, putting the puck in the net. And you talk about scoring in all areas or in all situations, right? So let's extrapolate that a little bit. That means the coaches are trusting him on special teams. Probably they're probably trusting him in late game situations and tight games. He was captain of the Swedish World Junior squad, so he's got leadership ability. So there's a lot to like about this pick. Again, he's got the body to be able to compete in the NHL. Probably still needs to put on a little bit more pounds, but and again, the skating, right? If there's anything we learned this year is that, skating can be one of the biggest weapons that are out there. Just ask the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Colorado Avalanche. They'll tell you exactly what they mean. And I don't know if it's a concern yet. Again, skating can be refined. You get to this level, you have skating coaches that will really pick apart your stride and tell you how you can get 1 or 2 more MPHs per stride. So I'm not that worried about it, but a natural finisher who can create space for himself as well as other players, who can definitely go into the corners and battle and keep possession of the puck. That's huge in today's NHL. It's all about possessing the puck. So really like this pick down at number 19. And again, when you're a captain and you have that natural leadership where you are carrying your team in the World Juniors, that says a lot about his character off the ice as well.
Yeah, the one guy that might define this draft for the Minnesota Wild is sitting at number 24, and he's the guy that I think a lot of people have eyes on, Daniil Yurov from Magnitogorsk in the KHL, and I think that contract scared away a lot of people. Kind of was a bubble player, one of the better teams in the KHL, and then also played for a top MHL team as well in the junior ranks too. 3 goals and 4 points at the U24 Nations Tournament, U20 team for Russia as well, a point per game player in the junior league the previous season, and scored 11 points in 7 games at the U18s as well. So a guy who's got some serious high-end skill, a Troy Terry comparable for those who are wondering for some college hockey pieces, 6'1", 178.
A nice comparison right now.
Yeah, December 2003. And he's a guy that, is a good penalty killer as well, projects as maybe a potential top 6 forward, second line guy. It really was kind of projected as a top 10 guy in the draft. But like we talked about, I think the KHL contract is kind of scary, and the Minnesota Wild potentially really deepened their prospect pool with this pick. And also, you have Kirill Kaprizov there as a countryman as well in that respect. So he's a guy that obviously is a bit of a wild card, where he's got a lot of high-end skill, a good puck handler, good hockey IQ, very, very strong on the puck in the way that he's in the weight room, and is a pretty good skater. Nothing overly dramatic, but has all the tools in the toolbox, and one that's really exceptional in the way he handles the puck and creates. And he's a producer. He's a guy who gets it done at every level, especially the international stage, which is something that you like, especially guys that are not in the Western Hemisphere. So, Nick, this pick could define the draft, but right now for the Wild, how does it define number 24 overall?
It defines that they see a high ceiling with the guy. It says that, and I was able to watch some film on him too, and what a release. Holy buckets. It's lightning quick. But beyond the stuff that you sort of maybe stare at a player at, but also away from the puck, he knows how to find space. He's got good instincts in passing. You talk about good skater. Definitely saw that on film. But also you mentioned too, this guy's a guy that was a utilitarian player. He could play in all different situations. So he could be that, again, top 6 player if he continues to develop. The KHL contract situation, I think, is a little bit overblown. It probably is has a little bit more merit just because of other things that are happening right now. But for him to be able to play against men effectively, and if he can refine some of that skill and maybe get a little bit more, you could say, meat on the frame, he could be a very well-rounded forward by the time he comes over here to the United States. So this is a very intriguing pick. It screams almost boom or bust for the Wild. The Liam Ogran pick was the safer pick.
I was just about to say that. It's the well-rounded pick,
Yes. And 24 is like you have house money because it's an extra first-round pick, and you decided to maybe take a splash with it. And I think if everything falls right, that could be a very nice splash for the Wild, meaning splashes of pucks in the back of opposing netminders.
Yeah, and they had that luxury too. This is, the pick at 24 is one of those picks that maybe you have the 35th overall pick and you trade that and maybe a prospect to maybe move up because you see the guy still on the board that's supposed to be a top 10 or 12 pick in the draft and he's still there for whatever reason. And you take a chance on that too. Let's not forget, this is obviously a little bit higher up in the draft, but, a guy like Cole Caulfield was expected to be like a top 6, top 7 guy. Certainly has panned out well for Montreal, especially in the second half of last season. He didn't go until number 15. The Minnesota Wild actually passed on him for Marco Rossi, which could still pay dividends for the Minnesota Wild too. But there's a lot of pieces to like here. I think for Minnesota, you mentioned Judd Brackett's scouting ability, and Corey Proman gave the Wild a B+. And I think I'm right there, maybe more close on the B side because you really never know when you get kind of in those lower tiers. But the number 24 pick is going to hinge on a lot of that rating, I think, as well too. So, Nick, do you have any parting thoughts about the Minnesota Wild in general, not only the draft but just what's been going on?
One pick away from Snuggerud.
Yeah, no, I know. I think that was another guy that I think a lot of Minnesota Wild fans and Minnesota Wild brass had their eye on as well too. But they picked at 24, not at 23. So, and
of course, it's a division rival at 23. St. Louis, for those who didn't follow the draft, picked up Snuggerud at 23.
How did their playoff go?
Well, better than ours.
Just ask Cam Talbot.
Right. I guess parting thoughts. First of all, a lot of stuff to talk about, which is great.
Crap, yeah. And the fact that we condensed it into just over 90 minutes is kind of impressive.
That's not bad. But still, free agency starts on Wednesday, so this will likely be another lengthy show this next upcoming week. Again, Johnny Gaudreau, rumored to be offered a $9.5 million contract by the Calgary Flames. It sounds like Gaudreau may be headed to market, which would surprise me slightly. Maybe on some other factions, maybe not. There's going to be a lot of movement this offseason. And so this will be probably a free agent heavy show for us next week. I can't wait to see it. And definitely more interested to see some of the other free agents for Minnesota Wild, whether Delorier and Bukestad, and does Minnesota also, with them being a little bit more crunched than they should be, do they open up some cap space? Do they make additional moves? It's all coming up here in about a matter of 72 to 96 hours. Yeah, 96 hours.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It should be interesting. You wonder if maybe wildcard Los Angeles might have been on the block for Johnny Gaudreau had they not made the Kevin Fiala deal. I mean, they just kind of threw $8 million out there like it was chump change a little bit. So, yeah. But I guess we'll have to see. A lot of exciting things, like you mentioned, to talk about. Some other important dates for those watching the YouTube. You've been able to see them on the bottom of the show. But just a reminder for people, the Minnesota Wild preseason action gets underway on 9/25, as does the St. Cloud State women's hockey team at the tail end of September, and then the men October 1st getting underway with their games as well. So a lot of things that we are excited to cover as we move forward. Nick, a lot of big news. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you in the den next week.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.